My name is Jodie Ginsberg. I am the Chief Executive of the Committee to Protect Journalists, and it's a real privilege to be here this evening, and also really difficult. As you saw at the end of the documentary, this is currently the deadliest time, certainly since CPJ has been in existence, and we've been around for 40 years, the deadliest time in the world to be a journalist. Last year, we saw a record number of journalists killed, the majority of them in Gaza, and I want to talk to you about that when we come to the discussion. And a record number of journalists were imprisoned. We are currently living through a period, even here in the United States, where journalists are increasingly vilified, harassed online, physically targeted at protests. You've met these guys, Craig, Juan, John. Between them, they have huge numbers of awards. But we're really here to talk about Brent, the work, and the challenges facing the profession. I've been a journalist for 25 years. And I used to think I wanted to be a war correspondent, and then I went to a war zone and decided I definitely was not cut out to be a war correspondent after a 15-year-old kind of waved an AK-47 in my face, and I thought, that's it, I'm done. So tell me, guys, because you've all done this, why you do this particular work.
Part of it is what I said in the film. I was following my brother like I did since I was a little kid, so that's part of it. But I think once you're there, you're so present, and I think it's the times throughout my career and my life where I felt like I was actually making a difference and making an impact, and I think that's what I was drawn to, And it was never, especially for Brent, it really was never about just being on the front lines, and so much of the work we did together and with John was not particularly like just being on the front lines and covering people shooting at each other. It really was just trying to get to the people and give a voice, and that was very meaningful to me, And I think the fear would always be 24 hours when you're sitting in Jordan right before you go into Iraq and you have a moment to think about it. But once you're there, you're really just present and just trying to do the work of telling stories and telling these people's stories.
Juan, for you, is it the same? Because, I've known a lot of war correspondents, and there is a certain sort of breed of people that you sort of think are attracted to the danger and the adrenaline. Is it about that? Because what's striking about the work that we saw there is, yes, you saw a lot of bombs and guns, but what you come away with actually is that sense of how that impacts ordinary people. Why do you do this work?
I didn't start thinking of myself, and I don't know if I consider myself a war correspondent, but I grew up in Colombia, and I grew up in a country that, we had a civil unrest, we had a drug cartel war, so you were surrounded by violence, you were surrounded by that, and I went back to Colombia, and I sort of started doing more of aftermath of conflict. But eventually you start going onto that path, and I don't know if it was a progression, but I think for the same reasons that Craig and maybe John will share, I think it's the people, about the story and being there and seeing I think for me in a conflict, you see the best of humankind and the worst, and it's very black and white. And to me, I think that's where I'm most calm, and I can really see that difference.
Can I ask you a follow-up about that? Because I feel like in most coverage that we see of war, particularly of kind of real-time news, we don't see that part. We don't see the best of people. But is there something different about, do you think maybe the way that you do it and the documentary style that allows you to tell a different kind of story about war?
So one of the reasons why I started working with Brent and Craig is because I think the compassion that they brought to documentary. I started as a photographer for a journalist. I always felt the medium was very limited, and I wanted to tell stories. I thought moving image and sound would add to that. But when you're in those situations, I think you do find the best of people helping each other. Someone who's sacrificing to stay behind, as what we saw over and over in Ukraine, was people staying behind so they can build their country, they can defend their country. And oftentimes you're right, maybe that doesn't get shown, but I lived it and I would see it, and that's sort of encouraging for me to be in those places. And if they're going through that, I can also go through that. It's sort of like the morale. And also, I guess when we're also shooting in situations like that, you're supporting each other. There's a lot of stuff that is mechanical. It's a lot of stuff that is language based on like, what do they need? What do I need? Are you okay? Are we okay? We need to do this.
John, why do you do it? I mean, you've got 17 Emmys, is that right? Two Academy Award nominations. Is it for the glory? What is it for you that's the attraction?
No, I'd give every single one of those awards back if it would bring Brent back. I don't think anybody's ever ready for this. I certainly wasn't ready for this. We went to the Vietnam-China border war. That was our first war. We had a plan when they start shooting, and my wife was a much better cameraman than me and to some degree braver than me. And we just dove right down to the ground in complete terror, and unfortunately I dove into a cow pie. And so it was like a real ignominious baptism. But when you go to a war zone and when you see what war does to people, it gets inside you and it changes you, and it never comes out. And you can get good at what we do. We're all really, really good. We know how to be able to be in a situation that might be terrifying, but we're focused on our job. Our job is to bring back that terror and to show people what war is really like. And that's why you keep going back over and over again, because the wars are continuing and we just have to keep telling the story of what it does to people. So that's, I think, why we do it.
How do you film death, maiming, despair, and how do you not look away?
It's actually harder in the editing room. When you're out there, you have a job to do. And if you don't do it well, you've risked your life for absolutely nothing. And so it gives you a sort of courage and bravery that you don't naturally possess. The real courage comes out. How many times did you have to watch your brother's dead body in the editing room over and over again? And what did it do to you?
Well, two questions. I suppose, how did you do it? Like, how did you mentally do that? But also, was there a difference for you being the subject? Was it a different feeling being on the other side of the camera?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's still happening, and I'm not really sure how. I just, it was an immediate thing once he was killed that just, it was, his voice just saying, of course you're going to take the camera and of course you're going to keep filming. And so a lot of it was loyalty to him and feeling like, why should it be any different? We've been documenting the horrors of war for all this time, filming soldiers' deaths in Chicago, filming funerals. Why would I not film Brent in this situation? And so that was the initial part of it. But like John said, the editing, I think, is where, there's days where or weeks where I'm fine, and then something hits you a certain way where you're not expecting it. I remember we were finishing the film and trying to replace, like, we had just ripped a lot of stuff from the internet of Brent's death, and then we had to go try to start tracking down high resolution footage of that stuff. And I felt like I had desensitized myself to that image of Brent, but it took a very long time. And then all of a sudden the Ukrainian police sent 10 different angles of that same shot, and it just shook me because it's like I had learned how to look at this way, not this way and that, so it still hits me, it just depends on the situation.
And for you, Juan, I mean, you were there. So how do you do the filming of those difficult things generally, and then how was it being involved in this film?
So we're there to do a job, and I think over the years, as John said, and I think we just get better at maybe distancing ourselves to that. You're there sometimes on assignment. In this case, we're always on an assignment, so you have to come back with those images. You have to come back with those. You're risking your life. You're trying to get access that maybe others don't have. And so you have to be, I don't know, I just feel that that's my responsibility, and I have to come back with the best footage that I can. At times, I have many times put my camera down just because I just can't do it. I said, this is not an image I want to take. and I will wrestle with that. That's sort of my call. But being in this, I still can't watch that image of Brent, the one that the soldier took. That's why I step out, because that's the image how I remember leaving him on the ground. And then I was taken into a car. And I don't want to think of Brent in that sense. So it's taken these years sort of to erase that image. So we were at a screening the other day, and I thought I was ready. And I saw that, and I grabbed Craig's, and I was panting, and I had to step out because it just brought me back to that moment. So it's always there. He's not here, and I am. So
it's beautiful. I think it is so powerful because it's not just images of war. It's also those beautiful images of people honoring him and showing how he had impact. And actually, in some ways, that for me, there were some of the hardest. We were all, I think, most emotional then. The hardest parts to watch, actually, in some ways, were not the parts that are visually traumatic. They were actually the commemorations and the memories. And in recent years, certainly, and the work that we've been doing at CPJ, there seems to be a lot more awareness about the kinds of post-traumatic stress and the support that you need. How do you process the traumatic experiences, the images that you work with?
All of this for a long time was insular. Nobody talked about this. If you showed fear, you risk not getting to be able to continue to do this work, and we want to keep doing this work. The thing that was always the antidote to the trauma and to some degree the fear was feeling useful. And when you're doing this job and you do it well, you're really, really useful to other people, especially if you're just sort of a normal schlub and a loser like I was, to be able to transform yourself into somebody who is really doing something that nobody else can do, but something that people really, really need to see, and to do it well protects you. You almost feel by being used, like the biggest fear is that we get censored and nobody will get to watch what you need them to watch. And that's going on right now. And it was a little bit easier in the old days. Sorry. Because they didn't hunt you. They hunted you in certain countries, like Nicaragua. They hunted you, but other places you were granted respect and deference, and sometimes even protection. I've had enemy people capture me, but because I was a journalist and they respected that, they spared my life. I don't think I'd survive today. I really don't, because they're hunting us. They're hunting us every single day.
And I want to come back to what's changed in a minute, but I did love that moment. I think it was in the Somalia attack, and when Brent was in the hospital and the guy says, I love the way that you hold the camera, you hold it with your heart. And I just thought that was so, I think that speaks to the sort of seeing in the moment you almost kind of instant feedback on the work, right?
Well, can I tell you something? We come from the streets here, and Craig and Juan basically come from the streets too. We are not the type of reporters who do stand-ups. It was hard editing this because Brent was never in the film. He was always behind the camera, and we always felt the most important people were the subjects, and it was hard in the editing room to be able to tell that story.
Craig, how do you process trauma?
By staying busy and keep working. I think if I didn't have this film to work on, I'm not sure how I would have dug myself out of this. So I think it was just each stage of this film. It was like, okay, I got to get there and get back. Now I got to edit. Now I got to do the, and just staying busy with it. So I think it's probably more scary to think about when this ends, So yeah, and hopefully I just get busy again and keep working. That's when you feel useful, like John said. Yeah.
But I don't think I ever had a deep conversation starting about trauma. I think I had trauma when I was growing up in Colombia. My dad was gunned down by the cartels. I remember living next to a hospital, and all the kids in the block, we will run when we hear a siren, and it would be like some gunshot wound. The initiation of my block was to go to the morgue, and they lock you up in a fridge with dead people. Like that sounds insane, but that was how I grew up. I would go fishing with my uncles, and I always tell the story. I would see dead bodies floating on the river. So you grow up, when you're surrounded by violence, I think you normalize it. But then one thing is to go out and do work to capture that. And I think certainly this shook me. I did a story a while ago about child soldiers, and that was also a little traumatic because I hurt them in a way that I wasn't expecting to be hurting them. It was published, the government punished the child soldiers, and I wasn't prepared for that. So there's just things that you just don't know. You're thinking you're doing well, but the process is, I think
Also each other.
you have each other. I lost a friend, but I gained a brother, and I think that's been these last 3 years have been checking on each other. He'll have bad days. I have good days. I have bad days. He'll have good days, and just having a network. I don't have an extensive network, but always checking with people. But I wasn't prepared for some survival guilt that haunted me for months. I think I find solace. I find a sense of purpose in work.
So let's talk about what's changed. CPJ we're based here in New York. We do three things. We document attacks on journalists, especially killings and imprisonments. We provide assistance, and my colleague Lucy is here, who runs our emergency response team. We increasingly provide assistance to journalists who are impacted by their work, whether that's they've been injured as a result of their work, or they've been arrested and need legal assistance, or they need advice. And increasingly in the US, we're helping people who need advice about their digital and personal safety and their legal safety. We do advocacy, so we advocate on behalf of journalists and journalism to try and make things better. And unfortunately, it is very clear to us that the situation for journalists has deteriorated rapidly in the last 5 years. In fact, tonight we're currently trying to get a stay to prevent the one journalist that's currently in prison in the United States, Mario Guevara, being deported. How does that show up for you in your work? How has that changed?
I mean, I remember like when we used to cover Juarez for many years, and walking from El Paso and Juarez and then back, and we would do stories with Mexican journalists, and I always just thought like what we do is not brave because they are living this every single day. They're publishing articles that are putting their families at risk. They're being killed. They've got the tributes to their fellow journalists sitting next to them, and then we would walk back over to El Paso and breathe a sigh of relief and edit for the night, and then go back and do it the next day. But so I just don't think I ever fathomed that we would get to a point where that's a whole different level of bravery now for journalists to be thinking about speaking up where, in the places where your family is and putting your family in risk. And that's something that I've never had to do in my career. So it is quite a change to be in this place.
John, you said they're hunting us.
It's pretty obvious that press on your chest is no longer protection, but it's often a target. It's happening in Gaza all the time. And it's gotten to the point where that type of violence against journalists is really, really normalized. The attacks on journalists here in the United States are really quite real, and they're being amplified every single day. People are being kicked off the air for something they wouldn't have been kicked off the air for 2 weeks ago. They kill people really quite regularly in other countries. You work for Internews, right? They killed a lot of people who work for Internews. This was an organization that promotes strong journalism all around the world. One of my heroes, Manana, She was run over by a car going 100 miles an hour, and they killed her and then systematically shut down every single one of those independent TV stations. The last one shut down a year and a half ago.
I want to talk about Gaza. The deadliest war for journalists that we have ever documented. More than 200 journalists killed, all but 2 of them killed by Israel, the majority of them Palestinian. We've just published a story today about 31 journalists killed in a strike in Yemen by Israel. If Brent were alive, how would he be covering Gaza?
The same simple way that he covered everything else. He would be trying to find a family, a kid, somebody to connect with and humanize the suffering. And he would stick with them. And he would stick with them as long as he could. You know, I mean, he was killed on a Sunday, and I think from Wednesday to Sunday, every single day was a conversation like Brent's time. You know, like I think you got enough. We would talk every day about the footage that he had, but you know, he just was like, one more day. I haven't quite got the family that I want to follow. So he would have stayed and found a family and stuck with them tenaciously until he was done filming, you know, or until he had a deadline.
You know, a lot of your work that we saw in the film was about going to somewhere else that is not your home country. But of course, with Gazan journalists, they are reporters in their own country. What do you think, Juan or John, we should be doing differently to provide them the support and the solidarity and the exposure that they need?
I was in Colombia, starting out my career, and I was really upset that editors will send reporters from abroad to report on my community. And slowly what they did is I think now they built a network of local journalists, support them. It took a while to get there, but I think who better to tell the stories than ourselves? But nevertheless, I think there's also a value of me going to other countries to bring a different perspective as a Colombian, maybe going into Ukraine. But I've seen the story, for example, what we were following with Brent. We were seeing the story of refugees. I have seen way too many refugees from Venezuela coming to Colombia, from Colombia going to Central America. So there's always some common themes. But I think it's important in creating those networks for local journalists. Maybe the training is not there. I feel that over the years, people have come and trained abroad, or the know-how has been built from the ground up. So I think it's continue to support them and give them the tools.
Should we be covering, John, the US differently? So how could we cover Gaza differently and provide support to journalists who are covering Gaza inside Gaza? But also, do we need to start covering places like the United States differently?
I think events in the United States are crying out for coverage, and the coverage, and many heroic reporters are doing a good job, and a lot of that is being suppressed. The opportunities, even in the documentary world, anybody who's involved in the documentary world knows that the opportunities for good, strong documentaries have been shrinking every single year, and we're having a tougher and tougher time being able to do the work that we want to do. My moment came as I was coming back from the World Trade Center. I was there that day and that night, and I was trying to figure out how to get my tapes up to CBS past all the roadblocks. The only way I could do it was on my motorcycle. And when you're on a motorcycle, the sense of smell gets enhanced because the speed of the air in your nose increases. And I'm driving. I got up to 18th Street, and I smelled something that I had smelled all over the world. It's sort of a combination of moisture, blood, and pulverized concrete and explosives. And you only smell this in a war zone. And I never smelled it in the United States. And when I smelled it in my own backyard, I got paralyzed. And I started to shake like this. And I had to get off the motorcycle because I couldn't drive. And I just sat there on the side of the road about 4 o'clock in the morning, panting. It took a while to get control, and then I finally was able to get back up and deliver the tapes. But we're in that type of situation right now in many, many different ways. And so I'm over the hill, but Craig and Juan, and I'm sure lots of you aren't. And we need everybody. We need CPJ. We hope that DCTV will be making contributions, and I hope that all you guys will too.
Thank you. I realised we're going to get kicked out. I'm sorry that we didn't have time for questions. That's my fault. I got very involved and I could have gone on for another 2 hours. I just want to thank you all. It's been such a privilege to be able to talk to you about this, to see this film. Thank you.
Thank you.